Okay, so we are recording now, and now I'm going to share screen. How's everyone's day going?
Good.
Okay, can people see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay, the only problem with me sharing screen is I have trouble seeing you guys, so don't bother raising your hand. It's a small group. If you have questions or comments, just shout them on out, and let's just make this unofficial and make it fun. Sounds good? All right, cool. So we're going to talk about wine, but we're also going to talk about what makes wine kosher. And we're going to get into some things about that go into different importance in terms of things like the taste of the wine, the price of the wine, and all that. So there is a reason that we're going to discuss it. I'm going to try to figure out on my screen. That is the only problem with Zoom and doing this is I need to, okay, that's better. Now I can see better. Terrific. Okay, very, very simple. What is wine? Wine is simply fermented grapes. And what are you fermenting out of the grapes? You're fermenting the yeast, right, out of the grapes, and you get sugar. Remember this picture because we're going to talk about this picture again when it comes to wine. Someone saying something? Is there a comment? Okay. All right, let's just talk about how you make wine. It's actually pretty simple. Think about it this way. Grapes are fruit, right? They're a farmer. Literally, a farmer grows the grapes. The grapes are harvested, and usually, by the way, they're harvested in September, October, right? You only make wine once a year. Think about any crop. You don't have apples growing all year long. You have apples growing, and then in the fall, you pick your apples. It's the same thing with grapes. Grapes are planted, and usually they are harvested for wine in the fall time. And then the bottling usually happens in around November. And that is your once a year, you make wine. You do not make wine all year long. It is a once a year process. So what happens is the grapes come in, they get crushed, they go into a fermentation tank. And remember this tank again? And they sit there for a while and ferment out the sugar out of the grapes or the yeast out of the grapes. You then press, you put the wine in barrels, age it, maybe, sometimes, depends upon the wine, put the wine in bottles and get it out the door. That's the basic process. When we think about wine, there's two parts to it. As I said, there's the growing of the grapes, and that's the farmer's responsibility. And when you think about who owns all these vineyards, I promise you, if you go to France or Italy, you don't have, unlike California, you don't have like these rich guys owning the vineyards and just hang around with these nice villas. In Europe, in South America, these are really farmers. And that is a very different person than the person who actually makes the wine. A lot of times, the person who grows the grapes sells the grapes to someone else because you know what? They don't know how to make wine. They only know how to grow grapes. So it is two different people. Okay, basic difference between white wine and red wine. When you pick the grapes for white wine, you bring them in, you basically throw them into a big machine that destems them and takes off the skin. Then you throw them into, and then after you get it all destemmed and all the skins off, you then do a press, and then you ferment the juice, and then the process goes. With red grapes, what happens, or red wine, you have the grapes, you actually ferment them first, and you're leaving the stems and the skins on them. and then you do the press. Okay, how many of you, I can see some hands, think white wine comes from white grapes and red wine from red grapes? Raise your hand, or if you know how to use the icons, use the icons. Okay, those who believe that, hate to tell you, you're wrong. The color from wine comes actually from the grape skins. That's why red wine is red. It is not from the actual grape. There aren't, if you look at grapes and you actually take off a lot of grapes, the skins, the grape itself underneath the skin is actually white. So where the color is coming from is actually coming from the skins, which is why you ferment it first and leave all the crap on it, where white wine, you get it all gone because that's how you get the white wine looking. The other thing that's important to know about the difference between white and red is also in all the stems and the skins and everything else, what you also have is a natural preservative called tannin. Tannin is a component of red wine. It is not a component of white wine. Tannin is a natural preservative. Tannin also breaks down protein, and we're going to talk about this again in a little bit. And when you break down protein, that's why with red wines, because of that tannin, a lot of times you think about eating meat, because the tannin in the red wine is actually helping to break down the protein in the big meat, in those big steaks. So you have that combination actually going on, believe it or not, in your mouth. It makes the steak taste better because you're tenderizing the steak, and it makes the wine taste better.
Is the tannin in the grape shell
The tannin is in the grape skins,
in the skin,
in the stems,
okay,
in the twigs. It is not in the grape meat.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So far, we're good. By the way, Lynn, how's your wine? You like it? Anyone else who's drinking, how do they like their wines?
I highly recommend it. It's the Barkin Shiraz, actually. And
Cool.
It's very smooth and satisfying.
Cool. I love it. Okay. White wine has three components: fruit, acidity, alcohol. Red wine has the three components plus the tannin I just talked about. So it's interesting. How many of you have heard the expression, the wine tastes balanced? Sarita, are you telling Lou? Sarita and Lou have done this class too many times. I should have kicked them out.
No, we're talking about your symbol, your tannin symbol. Lou called it a cow, and I thought it was a tiger. And I'm like, why do you have a tiger for tannin?
Oh, it's supposed to be a cow. But good. All right. So these are the four components. So have any of you heard that expression, the wine tastes balanced? Okay, so Miriam has other people. For me, when I hear that expression or when I use that expression, what I mean is when I taste the wine, these four components seem balanced to me. That one is not coming out too strong versus the other. That's the expression, the wine is balanced. So let's talk about what each of these components are and why they're important. Fruit. Let's guess that's the grape, right? But think about all the different wines. Think about all the different grapes. In Italy, there are over 200 grapes that are made into wines. So it's not the grape when we talk about the fruit, it's which grape or which combination of grapes. That's when we talk about the fruit. So sometimes, right, We don't want a heavy wine. We want a light wine. So we think about light grapes like Pinot Grigio. There are other things we'll think about and talk about that too. Sometimes we want a big heavy wine because we're having a big heavy dinner. So we want a big grape like a Cabernet Sauvignon. But there are other grapes in between that and lots of them. And so we think about, when I think about which wine do I want, and I have a slide on this, one of the things I think about is, which grape do I want? It's not about any wine, it's about which kind of wine do I want? And everyone, by the way, has different wines that they're their favorites, and that's okay, in different tastes, but that's the start. Acidity is a natural byproduct of wine making. And when you get acidity, the acidity actually does a couple of things. First of all, it does balance off the food, right? Foods all have different tastes. If you have big acidic food, you want a wine that has a lot of acidity, because if you don't have that acidity and you drink the wine is going to taste flabby versus the acid food you're drinking. Also, that acidity in the food will overpower any taste you have of the wine. So we think about acidity, acid on acid. So for instance, fried foods, you want Sauvignon Blanc. Why? It's not one of the most acidic wines there are. So you think about that in terms, again, of the balance. Also, if you don't have a lot of acidity, what will happen is if you have a lot of fruit, the acidity also balances off the fruit. So back to that word flabby, right? If you ever heard anyone use flabby, flabby is all about not enough acidity in the wine. The wine tastes flat. Flabby, flat, that's kind of the terms we use. Alcohol. Remember, you're fermenting the alcohol out of the grapes. That's part of the process. Most wine is anywhere between 8% on the low end to pure wine, not fortified wine, but pure wine on the high end. If you go 15%, that's a big, big wine. What's that, 14? Right, 14.
13 and a half actually, but yes, you're right
Okay,
on.
close. It was going to be somewhere in that range. Also, certain wines, I can tell you what the alcohol is just by the kind of wine it is. And that just goes to, again, the whole balance. The part of the alcohol, and I look at alcohol for a couple of reasons. First of all, if you're fermenting the sugar out of the wine, the more you ferment, the higher the alcohol. So people who say they like dry wine, what do you think I look at to determine if a wine is dry? I look at the alcohol level. A wine is considered dry 11.5 and above. That is considered dry. Anything below 11.5, probably in that 8 to 11, though I tend to go a little bit higher up, 8.5 to 11. We don't call that sweet, we call that off dry. So that's off dry. I tend to drink white wines. Most white wines you'll find, especially my favorites, the Rieslings, the Gruner Veltliners, and others, are usually just around 11.5. Anything below 11.5, if I'm not sure, it's off dry. I'm not going to drink it, especially Rieslings. I'm a dry person. If I look at a Chardonnays, most Chardonnays will sit somewhere around 12.5%. When you get into the red wines, now the bigger the wine, usually the higher the alcohol level. So that is one of my indications about, when I say big, how much fruit I'm going to taste. Because alcohol will actually bring out the fruitiness of a wine. So that is the balance between the alcohol and the fruit. So one of the things that I'm going to judge when I'm choosing a wine is if I'm having, since we're talking of kosher wine tasting, if I'm having a big Shabbat meal or Pesach, right? I'm having a lot of big meats, briskets. I want a bigger wine to go with that, one that's a little bit more fruity. If it's more fruity, it's going to have that higher alcohol content. I will say that there is a new thing going on in the winemaking business, which I'm loving, is now they're making a bunch of red wines at about 11.5% alcohol level. And they're actually making them into bigger wines. I'm seeing a lot of Portuguese wines at about 11.5 now. And my wine geek friends and I are tending to drink that. And it literally is because, you know what, I can have one more glass of 11.5 wine than I can have at a 14% wine. The older I get, no, I'm serious. Yeah, I don't want to, you guys, everyone on this phone knows, I love the taste of wine. I do not drink wine because of the alcohol. If there was a non-alcoholic wine that tasted like an alcoholic wine, I would be there. It's the taste for me. And I don't want to wake up in the morning feeling drunk, feeling hungover. So if I can drink a lower alcohol wine that offsets the meals I'm eating, why wouldn't I not do that? So that's another reason I actually also look at alcohol content. I already talked about tannin. Tannin is only in the red wine, breaks down protein, and that's the mix. So by the way, there are certain grapes that have higher tannin in them. Cabernet Sauvignon. Why do you drink a Cabernet Sauvignon with a big steak? Because it has high tannin in it. In order for that tannin not to taste like a bitter taste in your mouth, you need to eat something that complements it. Otherwise, it is going to taste like a bitter taste in your mouth. That's if you drink a wine and you go, ooh, usually a red wine, that's from the tannin. And tannin will definitely make a wine unbalanced. Now, big hint of the day, guys. Some of you have heard this already. If I go into a bar, literally the bar, and I want to drink, I ask a very simple question. Usually I'll prefer red wines. What is your red wine? As soon as they say it is Cabernet Sauvignon, I say, no, thank you. What else do you have? If all they have is Cabernet Sauvignon, I drink beer. I stop. Here's why. We're going to get into this when we get into price point, but in a normal bar, when you're sitting there, they are pouring you basically a $15 bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon, which they're charging you $15 for the glass, but the bottle is usually seriously 15 to 20 bucks at best. And the reason why it is $15 to $20 is because it's hard to buy a good bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon for under $20. It just is. We'll talk about why in a second. Okay. As a result, the thing that makes that Cabernet Sauvignon the most off balance is there's too much bloody tannin in it. And you're sitting at a bar drinking. You're not eating food. So there is nothing going on to offset the tannin. I rather drink Merlot. I rather drink Malbec. I rather drink Pinot Noir. I rather drink Shiraz. I rather drink anything other than a Cabernet Sauvignon when I'm sitting at a bar. Was there a question? Statement?
It's like licking metal.
I agree. Absolutely, David. But if I'm sitting at a bar and I want a glass of red wine, seriously, as soon as I say, because most customers want that Cabernet Sauvignon, as soon as I say, what else do you got? They usually have something else. That's my choice. So that's my hint for today. By the way, same thing about Chardonnay, but Chardonnay for a different reason. You're getting crap when you're sitting at a bar, that they're charging you literally for that glass what they paid for the bottle. Don't do it. There's other wines to drink. Or if you're doing it, I'll tell you the hint in a second. Okay, let's talk about what makes wine kosher. So remember, wine is made once a year. The reason I'm bringing this up
Mhm.
is because every vineyard has to make a decision at the beginning. Is the wine going to be kosher or not? You can't decide, you up to the fruit is grown and you're ready and you're picking the fruit. That's your stopping point. After that, you have to make the decision. Is your wine kosher or not? Your next step then becomes, are you going to make wine kosher for Passover or not? Most wines that are made kosher, and the decision is usually in Israel, if you're going to make it kosher, you might as well make it kosher for Passover. You know why? Why? There's no reason why not. No, I'm serious. What makes a wine kosher is what I put on the slide. You use only kosher ingredients, right? So you have to make sure the yeast you're using is kosher. You have to make sure the fining agents, which are like the preservatives and some of the other stuff you put into the winemaking process, are kosher. By the way, most of the time they are. And you have to do under the supervision of a rabbi. In Israel, this is a little bit of a problem because which rabbi certifies your wine as kosher might decide who will buy and who will not buy your wine. So that is a big deal. And the same thing, and by the way, you pay for the privilege of that rabbinical supervision. And depending upon which rabbi, you're paying for that privilege. The same thing for making a wine kosher for Passover. You're now paying for the privilege of making sure that the rabbi not only certifies it kosher, but you pay again to make sure he certifies it kosher for Passover. So most vineyards will say, we'll do it. But honestly, the vineyards I know that won't, if they're making them kosher, why won't they go the next step? It's usually a cost thing. It has nothing to do with the winemaking process. It has to do with the money that they have to pay to certify that the wine is kosher for Passover, and it's not worth it to them. So very few, if it's kosher, honestly, and this is all up to people, how you feel about the certification of kosher for Passover. Now, kosher, now what's one other thing that makes a wine kosher? Because this is also a very big deal, which costs a lot of money. In order for the wine to be kosher, the wine has to be, once it gets to the winemaking, once it goes into the barrel, to the point that someone pours the wine, only Orthodox men who observe the Sabbath are allowed to touch any of the wine making process from beginning to end. So the people who dump the grapes, anyone can pick the grapes. Once the grapes get dumped into that first tank, they have to be Sabbath observing men. Once the grapes get changed into another barrel, they have to be Sabbath observant men. The people who put the wine into the barrel have to be Sabbath observant men. When you go to a restaurant, the person who opens the wine and pours it into your glass must be a Sabbath observant man. All of that, I hate to tell you, adds to the price of a bottle of wine. So it's not only, and from a labor perspective, right, you have to be very careful on who you hire. So all of that makes it complicated for the wine being kosher. It's less really about any agents used. It's more about, that's the one aspect that can really screw you up and cost you a lot of money as a winemaker. If you don't have Sabbath observant men doing this whole process, and especially if you're the winemaker and you're not Sabbath observant. Okay. Now there's another kind of wine that's meshuvah. So you'll also see on kosher meshuvel. What is meshuvel? So meshuvel means that the wine has been made into a temperature, raised and boiled to a temperature of 185 degrees. What do you think that does to wine or anything else? Yeah, totally ruins the taste. So now they're doing what's called flash pasteurizing, and that is changing. It's one of the things that have come in the last 5 years that has made, one of the reasons, I'll give you all the others, that have made kosher wine taste so much better, because they're no longer having to raise the heat to 185 degrees. They can do this flash pasteurization, and that seems to have solved the problem. The fun part is, why does wine need to be meshuvel? Does anyone know this? I actually looked this up like 20 minutes before we started because I didn't know. All right, you guys ready for this one? This is my wine factoid for tonight. It was to prevent the wine to be used for idol worshiping in the old days. In ancient Israel, when there was any kind of idol worshiping, one of the things that they did was they drank wine amongst the occasions or poured wine. So in order to make sure Jews did not use the wine for any kind of idol worshiping, they literally made the wine taste bad. And the way that they could make it taste bad in ancient Israel was to heat the wine to 185 degrees. So that is where the custom of meshuvel comes from. You know what? Everyone has their own observance, and that's okay. I'm not going to say anything, but that has this pasteurized, doing the flash pasteurization has really helped a lot. Does anyone on this call, because I can't see anyone because of the slides, anyone have any thoughts or anything they want to add to that? Well, you guys are quiet. Am I boring you or am I actually meeting the mark here? Okay.
We're having fun listening to you, Fern.
I just say I hate it when I have to talk so much. So
Fern, is that flash pasteurization like what they do with the milk now, like the
Yep.
shelf milk?
exactly, same thing, Miriam. Same exact thing. Okay, price of wine. Because everyone always makes the assumption good wine costs a lot of money, bad wine costs a little money.
Not true.
Not true by any stretch of the imagination. So most of you on this call know my definition of a good wine. If you like it, it's good. If you don't like it, it's bad. I'm pretty simple on this one. I really am. When Lynn just joined earlier, she and I were talking. I literally had a friend text me last night saying, have you ever had this Pinot Noir? Or what do you, and no, not have you ever had, what do you think of it? And I love when people say, what do you think of it? Because as I said, also, I have not tasted every wine, so I don't always know. So usually when someone says to me, what do you think of? My first question is, do you like it? And if they say yes, as my friend Julia did last night, then it's a good wine. That's it. There's no other thing. You don't like it, it's not a good wine. There are wines I like that you might not, and there are wines you like that I might not, and that's all okay. It's like art. I can look at a Pollock and I don't get it whatsoever. Other people look at it and it's in the Museum of Modern Art. Okay, that just goes to different tastes. Yes.
It's Liza. Quick question. What percentage of the bottles of wine that you buy do you think that those bottles are bottles that have gone bad?
Okay, so here, that's a very simple question. First of all, 1 out of every 10 wines that are bottled are corked. They're bad. 1 out of 10. It is not surprising when you taste a bottle that is corked. It is more normal than not. Second, the vast majority of wine should be drunk in the first year of you buying it. The vast majority of wine is not to be laid down and reserved. Champagne, all of you who have bottles of champagne from your wedding, I promise you it is bad. I'll bet you right now. Don't save it for your 50th anniversary. If you haven't opened it, unless the one exception are vintage years. Vintage year champagne are years that a particular vintner, based on his winemaking and his tasting of a particular vintage of champagne, says, wow, this is special. It is now a vintage champagne. Those will usually stay for many years, but not necessarily 50 years. Most wines are meant to be drunk the first year you buy them. So don't be shocked if you open a bottle and it is bad. By the way, the easiest way to know that your wine has already turned is if you take out the cork and the cork is totally wet from top to bottom, your wine has turned to vinegar. How do I know that? Because vinegar is less dense than wine, and that is one of the indications that the wine has turned, because it turns into vinegar. Okay? When you open a bottle of wine and you're given the cork, what you're supposed to do with that cork is, yeah, you smell it. You know what you're smelling it for? You're not smelling it for the wine. You're smelling it for vinegar. Does it smell like vinegar? If it does, chances are your wine is bad. If you smell it and it smells like fruit, chances are your wine is good. Some of you have heard this story. By the way, you can't smell, cork smells like cork. You can't smell a cork and tell me what kind of wine is in there. For many years, my ex-father-in-law told me the same story literally every time I saw him, or every time he opened up a bottle of wine, which was every time I saw him. Which is, I have a friend who smells the cork and he could tell that it was a 1962, I don't care. And I had to bite my tongue. When I finally got divorced and I was close with my in-laws and Harold started telling me that story, I'm like, Harold, I've waited 12 years to tell you this. Cork smells like cork. I'm sorry. Your friend can't smell the wine and I don't have to tell you this anymore. I no longer am married to your son. So cork smells like cork. Go for the vinegar.
So Fern, is there another, now that a lot of the wines, even the good wines, don't use cork, right? Because, it disintegrates, right? And a lot of them, years ago, if it was a screw top, you knew that it was like the stuff you drank in college. And today you buy good stuff. Like you don't smell the cork anymore.
No, well, what you do though, Miriam, is so a couple of things on that. Okay, first of all, there are now 2 countries in the world that have outlawed cork, which are Australia and New Zealand, and others are doing that because of the endangered cork tree. The other thing that winemakers have learned is when you use plastic corks, or more important, screw tops, guess what? 1 in 10 bottles of wine no longer turn. Because the thing with cork is that they're porous. That oxygen coming into the bottle is what turns the bottle. So the fact that now you're using either the plastic corks or screw top, actually from the winemaker perspective, if people would get over thinking about the quality, the winemaker doesn't lose wine anymore. It's actually more economical. First of all, it's less expensive. And more important, he doesn't lose bottles anymore. He's saving money. So they love it. But now it's why you taste, right? So what happens? The sommelier or the waiter comes over. First thing he does is he uncorks the bottle. He gives you the cork. So what do? You look at the cork. You look at the cork and I look at it first. What am I looking for? I'm looking to make sure it's whole, that some of that cork isn't in this expensive bottle of wine I just paid for. So that's number 1. Number 2, I'm looking to see, is it dry or wet, right? If it's all wet, I'm not worried about that wine. The third thing I'm doing is then sniffing the cork again for the vinegar. Then I'm taking that glass of wine. I'm smelling it. Why? What am I smelling for? I'm smelling again. how vinegary is it? And also I'm kind of smelling a little bit for the alcohol. So one of the things that I'm doing when I'm swishing the wine around, I'm actually swishing the alcohol out of there. So I'm swishing the wine, I'm looking at it, I'm looking at the wine, the glass. I want to see, does the color somewhat reflect what I thought it was going to be? You know, is the red wine look red? Does the white wine look white? If you're more sophisticated and you've bought certain wines, there are white wines that I expect to look more pinkish or more apricot-y. There are other wines, so that gives me, and also gives me an indication of what the wine's going to taste. Then, to your point, Miriam, I taste the wine. If it tastes like vinegar, it's vinegar. It's bad. I come here. Listen, I've gotten into arguments because one of the things you never do is you never send a bottle of wine back because you didn't like it. That was your choice. You screwed up. You're stuck. Okay. But if the wine has turned, I got into a huge fight with a sommelier in Zurich years ago because he literally got into an argument with me about the wine. I kept saying it was turning. I realized I am a woman and I am American. I was 0 for 2. Finally, after a huge argument with me, I said to him, taste the wine, which he had. I said, so has the wine turned? He said, oh yeah, it's terrible. I said, so why have you been arguing with me for the last 20 minutes? He really thought I was going to back down and not make him go get me another bottle. So that is part of it, but I literally had to say to him, so, and then he couldn't lie to me. So that's what you're tasting the wine for. You're not tasting the wine to see if you like it or don't. One of the things that you need to do with big red wines is you need to either decant them or I tend to put them in a glass. Why are you decanting big red wines? The wine has been in a bottle. I have used this analogy before, and I'm sorry, I'm going to use it again because I think it's the best analogy there is. A bottle of red wine is like a teenage boy's bedroom. It has been closed up. The windows are closed. There is sweat clothes that haven't been washed. There's old food. He smells because he hasn't taken a shower. The bed hasn't been changed. And those noxious fumes are just there living in that bedroom. What do you do to it when you walk into that room of a teenage boy's room? First thing you do is open the window and get fresh air into that room and open the door. That is what you're doing when you're decanting a bottle of wine. You're opening that bottle, you're putting into a decanter so that oxygen, literally fresh air, mixes in with that wine because that wine has just been sitting there and it needs some of that oxygenation to get the freshness coming back out. So that's why you decant red wine. If I am at a business dinner or dinner with my wine geek friends and we always order white wine and red wine, and the red wine, even if we're not going to drink it and we don't want to decant it, I actually have them pour a glass of the red wine around because a wine in a bottle with the cork out, think about, again, teenage boy's bedroom, opening the window this much is not going to do anything. That's the same taking the cork out of the bottle. It's not enough. You have to either pour it into a glass or pour it into a decanter. Okay. Is that a good analogy? That one you're going to remember, right? Yeah. Okay. Let me talk, because this is always the thing about the price of wine, because I think this for people always make the assumption, right? The more expensive, the better. The least expensive, the worse. And I disagree with that. I think, first of all, you have to understand why a wine is priced the way it does. It is. And if you understand that, then you can understand that there are great $10 bottles of wine and there are terrible $100 bottles of wine and everything in between. So first, let's talk about what goes into it. Keep telling you, grapes are basically a farm. Where is your farm? How much was the cost of that farm? How many acres do you have? How many plants do you have? That all goes into the price. Obviously, if you have a lot of acres and a lot of plants, you're going to have a lot more wine. You're going to have a bigger yield. You may be able to charge less. So one of the things when I sent out the wine thing, Barkin, right? Barkin is the second largest wine manufacturer in Israel, which is great. The thing about it is when you have a lot of acres like that, just like here in the States, the big California vineyard can charge less. Why? Because they're making a lot more wine, because they can offset those costs. So that's one thing. Two is the yield. You can have a lot of plants, but part of being a farmer is that balance of the plant and how much fruit you have on that plant. That's your yield, right? You might decide that, you know what, anyone who knows me knows I am not a gardener. I have a black thumb, but as I'm looking at you guys, a lot of you are. One of the things you do is prune. Why are you pruning your plants? Because you're looking at the dead leaves, you're taking them off, you're looking at flowers and saying, you know what, I'd rather have bigger flowers with a less amount, right? And if I take off this branch and that branch, look what it's going to do. Well, that's exactly what the farmers do with the grapes. They do the same thing. They're looking at that and they're making the decision, which grapes, how big, what do I want? And they're looking at vines versus grapes and they're determining the yield. If you have a lot of yield, you can probably charge less. If you only have a little yield, you're going to have to charge more, but you're going a little bit more for quality than you're going for quantity, right? The bigger vineyards are going for quantity versus quality. When I say that, I'm not talking about good taste versus bad taste. In wine, when we talk about quality versus quantity, we're talking about the consistency of taste. Quantity means consistent taste. If I open up a bottle of Barkin wine, I don't care what year it is, if I open up the Barkin Shiraz, I almost can guarantee you I know exactly what I'm drinking year after year after year. If I take a little vineyard like Herman Wiener, he's going not for quantity, he's going for quality. But what quality means is that he's looking at the grapes this year and saying, what's the best wine I can make from the grapes this year? And this year, using the same grapes, right? The same vineyards, well, they're not the same grapes, but the same vines, might taste very different than last year. And that's what he is going for. So he is looking for that year over year, honestly, inconsistency, where big wine producers are looking for that year over year consistency. And that's one of the big differences. So yield, vines versus grapes. Barrels. Do you use barrels in your winemaking? A brand new oak barrel can cost you anywhere between $900 and $2,000. By the way, a barrel is only considered new if you use it 3 times. After 3 times, it's no longer new. So if you want that new oak taste, and every time you use the barrel 3 times, you had to shell out $2,000, guess what? That's getting added to the cost of your wine. If you're using stainless tanks, a lot of Chardonnays, a lot of white wines, the first fermentations are now in stainless tanks and not barrels. 1 tank is $900. And by the way, that tank never goes bad. So that saves money. You don't have to add that to the cost of wine. My hint about Chardonnay. If you are into Chardonnay, and I told you never get a Chardonnay at a bar because it's terrible, sitting at the bar. One of the things do, ask for Chablis. Chablis is Chardonnay grape made in France. Chablis is made in stainless tanks. Because that stainless tanks, you get this crispness and this fruitiness that comes out that you don't get in terrible California Chardonnays that were made in old oak barrels. It's actually killing the fruitiness of the wine. So that's my hint, Chablis. It's the same wine. It will cost the same amount of money, but it's the whole stainless steel tank makes all the difference in the taste. Okay, Wine types. Okay, one of the things too, machine versus hand-picking grapes. There are some vineyards are so hilly, guess what? You can only pick the grapes by hand. Because of that, you have to hire laborers. If you hire laborers, guess what? Wine costs more money. If you can use big machines because your land is flat, right? Like in Israel, guess what? It costs less because you bought the machine and you use the machine year after year. So that adds or takes away from the cost. Wine type. If your wine needs like a Barolo, has to be in a tank, has to be in a barrel for 3 years, has to be in a bottle for 3 years. You lost 6 years from that wine. That is your inventory sitting there not earning any money. Guess what? They cost more money when you have to buy it because the farmer and the winemaker has to make up the fact that that wine has been sitting in his basement for 6 years, not making any money, and he needs some money from it because he has to pay back his bank loans that he took out 6 years ago to put that bottle into it. So that also becomes a problem. We talked about how kosher adds to the cost of the wine. We talked a little bit about quality because the quality goes to all these other factors that we talked about already. That adds to the bottle. Packaging. How pretty is your label? Are you doing carved glass? I'm serious, guys. You know, all this, think about anything you buy. All these little back ends go in. Everyone just thinks it's the cost of the wine. No, it's all these shipping. Israel's biggest problem right now with the US market is the fact that between the exchange rate, the export taxes Israel charges, the import taxes the US charges, a $40 bottle of wine, if that's the price point, I can drink better quality wines at $40 than I can in Israel. Not that the Israel wine is bad, but usually if I'm drinking a $40 bottle of wine, if I was to drink any other country, that wine would probably price point be more about $30. So one of the things I have to do is make a decision. Do I want to spend an extra $10 on the wine because it's from, I'm serious, because it's from Israel? And I do sometimes say yes, and sometimes I say no. So all that adds to the cost, but that is Israel's biggest problem, is all these taxes actually cause their price point to be higher than comparable quality wines. Retail restaurant. Any bottle of wine you buy in a restaurant is 3 times, it used to be twice, now is 3 times the cost of that same bottle in a store. 3 times. Sometimes it's 4 times. What used to be, by the way, a bottle of wine is 5 to 6 glasses, depending upon how big a pour you do. Okay. It used to be that a bottle of wine, a glass of wine would be basically, maybe if it's 6 glasses, basically they charge for 3 glasses. Now, what I'm literally seeing in a lot of restaurants is almost the bottle of wine is exactly what they're charging me a glass for. So they're making a killing on that. So just be aware. Okay, we have a couple of minutes left, and I'm just gonna, any questions so far before I get into my closing thing? Questions, comments? Okay, I really feel like I'm boring the hell out of you guys.
It's good. No, it's all good.
Okay, okay. So
It's all good.
all right, here's how, this is Fern's decision-making process in wine. How does Fern choose what wine she's drinking? First thing I do is, why am I having wine? I'm serious, why am I having wine tonight? Am I sitting watching the Meghan Harry interview and with Oprah and I want a glass of wine? Am I watching the Super Bowl and I want a glass of wine? Am I having dinner? Is it a beautiful summer evening and I'm sitting on my back screened-in porch and I want a glass of wine? That's the first thing I'm deciding is, why am I having that glass tonight? Because that glass will then reflect the mood I'm in, and that comes then to one of the choices I make. what's my price point? You know what? If I'm opening up a bottle tonight and I'm then gonna put the bottle in the refrigerator for the next week, I'm not opening up a $60 bottle of wine. I'm opening up a $15 bottle of wine. Okay, by the way, for me, most bottles I drink are between $10 and $20. Vast majority of bottles I drink are $10 to $20. So for other people, my 10 to 20 might be your $10 range. So please don't get into the price. I'm just talking firm, okay? So I think about that. Am I having company over? Who's my company? I have certain company come over who are not into wine. I'm not opening up a $60 bottle of wine for them. I'll open up a really nice $20 bottle of wine, which I promise you they'll enjoy. But that $60 bottle of wine, I want to open that up for people who are going to understand when they sip it, it's a $60 bottle of wine and not think it's a $15 bottle of wine or drink it. Look, my older sister drinks wine the way you guys drink water. She drinks Chardonnay or white wine. She doesn't drink reds. When she's coming over, I clear out my wine refrigerator of anything good, because if she opens up wine, I'm telling you, she doesn't care. She's just tossing the bottle. So I do think about that. Okay, what am I in the mood for? Do I want white? Do I want rosé? Do I want red? Part of it's the weather. Part of it is lots of other things. Where am I drinking the wine? Again, outside, I want a different, and it's hot, I want a different kind of wine than if I'm sitting in a bar. Am I at a steak restaurant? Am I at an Italian restaurant? Am I sitting in my house? Am I sitting in your backyard? All that to me is all different wine that I would be bringing. Obviously, what are you eating? Because that makes a difference. I'm not drinking a white wine with steak because I will never taste the wine. The steak will just make that wine taste like crap. In the same sense, if I'm eating salmon, I'm not drinking Cabernet Sauvignon because I won't taste the salmon. So everything goes, part of that is what am I eating? And I do try to think about, I'm complementing the wine to the food, but there aren't really big rules around that. You know, the bigger the wine, the bigger the food. The lighter the wine, the lighter the food. By the way, big hint is for Passover, for Thanksgiving. You never pair wine to your mains. You pair wine at big meals to the sides, because the sides are more exotic and more whatever. And what you can do if you try to pair a wine to your main, you're going to overpower your sides. So think more about your sides than you do the main.
Fern, I have a question.
Sure.
So you have a recommended wine list. And in terms of what are you eating or not eating, so you can think about the wines that go with the meal, but what about the wines for during the seder itself when you're not eating or only having karpas?
So I think about that is I have some light reds on there that I think about it. And those are the ones that I would suggest. Also, most people when they're doing the seder are not drinking. You can have white wine with the karpas. Do whites. And then when you have the meal, pour red. There's no rule that ever said the wine has to be red. That's tradition. By the way, that goes back to the old Manischewitz Meshuvel, when the wine was boiled to 185 degrees and they added all kinds of corn syrup and stuff in it to make it sweet to overpower this bad taste. Okay, and Sarita, tell me what your sides are another night and I'll tell you, I'll offer some suggestions. And then I said who you're sharing with. Final thing is trust your wine store. Look, if you go into Total Wines and there's a guy in there, when I say trust your wine store, it's not the wine store. I promise you, if you go into a Monte Vino and said, can I have a bottle of wine for under $20 that Fern will like, they will get you a bottle. Seriously, all you have to do is tell them something Fern will like. This has been proven because they know the wine I like and therefore they do it and they know it. If you go into Total Wines or Bottle King, whatever, and there's someone you talk to and give recommendations, and you say, look, usually I drink this, I want to try something else, and they make a recommendation and it's good, then that's your guy. Doesn't have to be a Monty. It could be anyone, but find that person that can help you and do that. Okay, I think I'm done. I'm going to stop
I see
sharing.
you only have one white. Do you have another white suggestion other than the Chardonnay?
The reason I only have one white is because in all the ones that I looked at, the only kosher for Passover I can find were Chardonnays. I am happy to do some more investigation. And there's a little wine store in West Orange, you know where the plant store is? There's that little wine store. He has a ton of kosher wines in there. I would suggest, and I didn't make the pilgrimage over there, but I am happy to do a field trip with someone and go over there and see other whites that they have. But yeah, the
You know,
Chardonnay.
Stu Leonard's up on Route 3 has a big kosher wine, kosher Passover. I have this Sauvignon Blanc that's Carmel. I don't,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
The Shoppers Vineyard in Clifton also has a very large selection of kosher wines. I don't know what they have in terms of whites, but they have a whole row of kosher wines. That's where
Because
the
we usually do
Orthodox
have
say.
white during the Seder.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I love
it's-
Shoppers Vineyard. They tend to really help you if you get the guy who's into the Israeli wines. They really help you out.
Hey, know your wine store. That's exactly what I meant. Yeah, I'm happy to look some more. So guys, I think
place. Shoppers Vineyard is a good place to look because they are very helpful.
right.
Fern, where is your list?
I sent it to Sarita, who sent it out.
How do we get it?
Can't hear you.
it's
Oh.
on the, if you click on the splash list, on the itinerary, right there, it says, here's your list.
The most recent one, right? So they sent out the links
This morning.
lots.
If you
And
come
if
to the one that
anyone-
went out this morning.
Yeah, and if anyone can't find it, please just email me. I'll just email to you directly because I have it. But guys, if anyone has like something they want to check, like Shoppers Vintner or whatever, if you send me a website and tell me your price point, I do this for people all the time. I'm happy to look at it and say, here are some choices for you. Look, my nephew's out in California and Las Vegas when they're going on dates do this. You know, here's the wine list, and Fern, what should I order? So happy to do it for you guys. Okay, I'm going to the Women's Seder. I hope this was useful. Any feedback, comments, anything you want to yell at, just send me an email. You can, or just yell at me anonymously or not anonymously. I don't care. But thank you guys.
Thank you.
I'm just going to tell you, I'll post on Shomrei week. I'll post the wine list, the recommended list again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sameach, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Yosh Koach.